Welcome to SMSF Mate, our general advice warning. We are required to warn you that any advice has been prepared without taking into account your objectives, financial situations, or needs. And because of that, you should, before acting on any advice, consider the appropriateness of the advice, having regard to your own objectives, financial services, and needs. Where the advice relates to the acquisition or possible acquisition of a particular financial product, you should obtain a product disclosure statement relating to that product and consider the PDS before making any decision about whether to acquire the product.
Welcome back to SMSF Mates podcast. Today we're talking about SMSF trust deed and declaration templates, what they are, where to get them, and important considerations when you're looking for them. My name's Tim, and I'm here with
Sonny
and Ashwin. Yeah, look, I think the template market is there generally to make things easier, so people can go through their own, step-by-step guide. But templates are also, fraught with their own risks around it, right? So there's usually a T's and C's page when you're going through the process. Then there's maybe, ideally in any template, there's a little question mark whenever you're filling things in, so you have more information of what you're trying to put in there, because the mistake of completing it wrong could be more detrimental than the $500 to $1,000 maybe you're saving by using the template yourself. In my mind, it's if you've gone through the process to set up an SMSF, you probably should also have gone through the process of getting advice to make sure it's the right structure for you, or what it entails if you decide to ignore that advice. But by doing that, you would have been engaged with some sort of advisor, whether it's an accountant with a financial license or whether it's a financial planner on their own, showing you that they would do the setup for you. And usually that setup, well, on average, I would assume most accountants are probably making maybe $1,200 in total from a setup of an SMSF, which isn't a lot of money when you consider maybe the hours involved in preparing it and reviewing it, sitting down with you, getting it signed, executed, etc. If you want to do it yourself, or you go through one of those online platforms that will set it up and register it for you, then that might be okay, because they've got a system and a process to align to make sure it's compliant and everything else. It's when my fear is people find templates online, they edit it with their name, the details, and go ahead and go, well, we're good. And you're like, well, no, you're not.
Don't do it.
Because the auditor's not going to be happy with it, because he's probably going to review it and go, where's that deed come from? And if it turns out it isn't compliant, you're in a whole world of pain, all because you try to save $1,000 at the start. And my gut feeling is, if you can't afford $1,000 to set up the SMSF, or the $1,500 or the $2,000 to set it up if you go corporate trustee, why are you doing it in the first place, right? Because the running costs of a super fund, which I'm sure we'll delve in another future conversation, are significant. So if you can't afford those running costs, is it the right vehicle for you in the first place?
Maybe touch on the actual cost of establishment and how that references.
Yeah. So if you do a normal SMSF, roughly with no individual with individual trustees, sorry. So if you've got two members, you would roughly pay maybe $300 on a templated website for them to fill it out with you, versus maybe sitting down with an accountant after you got the financial advice to give you the okay to do it, or you've ignored the advice, whatever it is, but you've got the advice. It'd probably cost an accountant on average $600 to $1,000 to set that up for you. So you're really saving $500 potentially, or a bit more if it's a company to run it. But if I'm going to be investing all my super in it, and my super balance could be anywhere from $100,000 to $500,000, if I can't part with that extra $500 or $1,000 at the start, what am I really doing this again? So,
and the risk of getting it wrong, as you mentioned, is far greater than a $1,000 differential, even double that.
Yeah. Exactly. And you'll find constantly that your deed will get updated in a super fund maybe every 3 years. It might be more, might be less, depending on legislation changes. So that deed that you've saved in the first place, you're going to have to update it anyway. And if the deed's your own template, the lawyer reviewing it might just go, I want to charge a full amount to review the whole deed and supersede it anyway. So you might as well just add it in as a compliance cost, right? And if you can't afford it, it's probably a red flag that you shouldn't be going down this pathway. Saying that, there are some online providers that have found efficiencies to make this work, but you've got to read through that deed and what are the restrictions within their fund and things to work in that platform, right? So I have seen websites where there's $0 setups and things like that, and they might be perfectly fine for you, but then go through their process. Don't you try and do the deed. Go through some sort of process, not involving yourself.
Ash, even with that process, the quality of that output's only going to be as good as the input, right? So even if there is a very clear laid out directional process of answering certain questions, if you answer that wrong because you don't understand what is being asked, there's still a chance of it coming out with a poor output, right? So
agreed.
I think even though there are those efficiencies for platforms and those establishments, I think we would still encourage people to seek assistance from an advisor or an accountant during that process. Have the advisor engage in that process so you don't get it wrong.
No, I totally agree. Yeah, your best advice is to engage a professional at the start to establish it and then make sure it's all going okay going forward, right? I am wary when people go down the path of do it yourself when they don't have a financial background or a legal background and things like that. Because look, even when a super fund is established and an accountant or advisor is involved, the ATO will call trustees on occasion to ensure they actually understand what they're doing. And part of that journey would have happened if they engage a financial advisor or a licensed advisor in the setup process. Because I remember we had a client set up a super fund and they had a phone call from the ATO and they answered all the questions perfectly fine, that the ATO were like, okay, yep, this is an established super fund and these people are investing for their purpose and they understand what they're doing. So
I was going to say it's remembering for us, but I guess for the general audience, it still comes down the trustees of that self-managed super fund, which are typically the individuals that are involved, or then the directors of the company that are then the trustee of the super fund. They are ultimately responsible for the running and management of their own self-managed super fund.
It's like we've said before, it's self-managed is that first two words, right? Self-managed. So you are responsible for how it goes and where it goes and making sure you don't get in trouble. So, I would engage advisors whenever you're not sure.
There's some, I haven't looked for a little while, but there's some good engagement tools in terms of, outside maybe some of the general information that you get via our website. There are trustee programs that are out there that different providers make accessible to people considering a self-managed super fund. Almost a trustee program.
Yeah, there are definitely things around that. I think one thing that I think the space probably needs at some point is an actual education establishment that will run through trustees, like here's a course that the ATO strongly recommends that you do. And I think there are courses when people have caused contraventions to go through an education process. But if you had a mandated course every time a self-managed super fund was set up, that XYZ had to attend it, you'd probably sort it out. But then, I can understand the other side of it, people saying, well, why is there another barrier for my own money? It's because it's for your own good.
And even, like an RG146, specific to certain products or investment types they're not too hard,
Yeah, but I can't speak for everyone, but my clients, there are clients that don't quite get all the financial matters, but they want to be first-hand control. So they might be doing a disservice for their retirement fund by, controlling it all opposed to engaging an advisor. But and typically it's because there's been some past event where an advisor's lost their trust that they're now gone into we'll just manage it ourselves and we'll deal with the consequences, which, ultimately accountability to yourself is great because, but, advisors got tarnished, but it's hard that a whole bunch of advisors got tarnished because it's not, in my belief, it's not the norm. And it's probably more because you didn't ask the right questions of your advisors, like how they're remunerated, what's their incentives, how is this, a prudent financial plan, and how will this help me in retirement? If you don't ask those questions, well, it's hard for the advisor to help you as well. But
I think I'd support the idea of the education process up front. I mean, it's important for trustees, anyone considering their own self-managed super fund, to understand what they're doing.
Yeah.
It's their funds that they're putting at risk and how they're managing them. We've talked about a couple of times before. Yes, it's self-managed and that onus is on self, but it doesn't need to be solely managed, right? So there's a world of assistance out there from advisors, financial advisors, accountants, lawyers. There's broader engagement tools to help you manage your self-managed super fund. You don't need to do it alone, and in some cases, frankly, shouldn't.
No, exactly, and I think that's why it's important to have a healthy balance before you engage in a self-managed fund, because you probably should be leaning on those resources, and if your fear of engaging those resources is cost, then there's a bigger concern, right? Because I've seen it in experience, and we probably all have mates that have done it, try to save some money in a process, whether it's a renovation or something, by doing a little bit themselves, and turns out that cost them a lot more money and time and headache with their missus because of the shortcut that was, blinded in there, right? Yeah. I can regrow that lawn. No, you can't. No, just get the guy in to put new lawn in and kill the weeds underneath it so it doesn't come back up.
Ash, not to digress too far, but do you think that detachment from how people manage their self-managed super funds, or how serious they are about it, can sometimes come down to the fact that they, some people still engage their super as if this is some money that is not ours and it's not our money yet. And I think in a lot of our conversations, we try and link back to, yes, it is your money. It's just that you can't access it yet, but it can be meaningful to you at some point in time in the future. So if you're going to do it right.
Yeah, I think it's definitely there, right? Because when you're young and you think about the way, and it stems all the way back to the lack of financial education we get when we're young. You start your first job, you get a form. You're so in the rush of earning the first paycheck at wherever you work that, or for me it was Maya. You just tick the box and choose the default super fund, right? So there's been some changes now that at least your fund will follow you with you and things like that going forward. But what was the process of selecting that fund? Where was the conversation with your parents or people around your age around financial? Which one should I be part of? What sort of things are they investing? That doesn't happen. And it's because we know we can't touch that money till we're 65 or 60 or whatever it is when we retire, right? It could be 70 by the time I get there. And you sit there and go, well, 18-year-old me or 17-year-old me does not care about 65-year-old me at that stage. I'm making enough dollars so I can go to the pub and go out. So we never get engaged because it always seems too far away. And if we have to think that far away, we can't realize that money in our head. And I think it has been good for some people and it's bad for others. And I'll say that in the sense, like, if you're a person that is, I'll use an example. I was talking to a broker the other day and he's like, we've got a mining client in his mid-40s earning close to 300 FIFO work, barely scrapes enough money for a deposit for his $600,000 house. You think he earns enough that he'd pay this house off in 5 years, but where's the money gone just day to day? But his super balance is very, very healthy. And it's only because he can't touch it. All right. And, it's been invested in an advisor and it's probably grown and managed well. I don't know, but it's still maintained because he couldn't touch it. All right. So for those people, super's a godsend. And if they were self-managed, chances are it might not have gone so well. While other people would see the opportunity costs or the opportunities in front of them and would want to take control of their money once they had a healthy enough balance to do it. Great. You know, and that's, I think, there's two streams about it. I think it's just
I think there is, but I think there's a challenge when you see 50-year-olds taking the same approach to the superannuation to your example of that 18-year-old.
Oh, 50, yeah. Well, yeah. And it comes back to the conversations that 50-year-olds had throughout their life, right? So, and I've been trying to educate my friends in my thought process of if we put more money in super now and we don't do the argument of we'll do it when the kids, you know, move out of home, you're going to be way better off by sacrificing hard in these years now than trying to do the 50-year-old catch-up between your 50 and 60, trying to throw in that same amount of money without the same return because you've lost, you know, the timing. You've lost all that compound amount and all the rest of it because you said to yourself, and then the other hard part is I've seen it. Like you see those 50-year-olds now throw in their full amount into super, the 25 or 30 grand into super each year, and you're like,
Playing catch-up,
but they're also giving up that little window when the kids have actually moved out and you and your wife or you and your partner want to go out and do things. You're just throwing all the extra money into super. Like that hurts. Like I would prefer to, you know, blow it on something stupid at that point because it had been invested well prior that I can afford to do it, right? Instead of going, oh, no, we're getting close to retirement, we've got to throw it all in. So
I think I don't think it's on the website yet, but we should put this up, and that is reminding people that it is your money. It's just you can't get to it, and under current legislation, it's still one of the most tax-effective vehicles to get compounded, you know, accumulation of wealth. Yep.
It is the best vehicle you've got, except you can't take control of that vehicle till you pull up stumps. But nothing wrong with that. And just make sure you can still do the other things you want to do in your life, right?
Which, coming back full circle, taking all that, I guess, not necessarily risk, but taking the time and the effort to build up a superannuation balance and manage it correctly along the way is all going to be put at risk if you don't get the establishment right and you try and cut corners.
Oh, exactly. It all comes back to the setup, right? So if you're looking from the point of view, this is a 20 or a 30 year or a 15-year journey, depending on when you decide to do this. Really, are you going to try and save $1,000? Like, don't sweat it.
And it's a good segue. So I think if we just touch on exactly like what a trust deed is, very brief, and why you would need it, and then I think the risks associated with getting it wrong, you know, whether it be change in legislation or, you know, it's just some sort of error in there. What happens if you get that wrong, and what are the penalties? And, you know.
Yeah, well, the deed's your rule book, right? So it's your rules. It's sort of like these are the rules for how your super fund is going to run.
It establishes the trust.
Yes, yeah. So it's the establishment of the trust, and it's your rule book. The HO don't like when family trust deeds get moved and changed a lot because it could cause a resettlement. But in the provision, there's no provision for that with superannuation. You can update the deeds as often as you need to because superannuation law changes regularly and there's a requirement for it to be audited. So because of that, we strongly recommend that people regularly update their deeds as part of their process because your deed from 3 years ago might be missing a few clauses that have changed since, and you need to now establish it in the new environment. But
sorry, I guess for clarity, the trust deed is the document that establishes the superannuation fund.
The existence of it, yeah.
Okay.
So you need that all executed. Then you apply for your ABN, your TFN to run the trust, and then you go through the normal regulation processes once that's happened. But it's ultimately the establishment of the trust and the super fund. So the consequence of getting it wrong could be up to a penalty of, you know, it's a non-compliant fund and there's a 46%, 49% now penalty for a non-compliant fund. So
that's the tax rate, is it? 49% tax on the money that's in the fund.
Top marginal tax rate.
You will lose your concessional tax treatment.
Okay, so all the good things about a super fund
gone
disappear
out the window
if you get that wrong potentially.
Yeah.
So
and
risks are high.
The risks are high for something that shouldn't be a risk you take lightly. So why would you not go through a proper establishment process and go through it and do it properly.
And that is probably the greatest risk. The benefit of the superannuation environment itself is, that tax concessional environment to help you accumulate.
Yep.
You get that wrong, you're then staring down the barrel of, 15% in an accumulation account, which is, the current tax rate within superannuation environment versus then your top marginal tax rate if you get it wrong.
And that's the trade-off people make for, the tax benefits are there because you can't touch it till you retire. So you're giving it all away and you can't touch it because you decide to be, for another word, cheap with the setup.
Yeah. I think one thing that actually really stuck with me, I think it was the last podcast we did, was the discussion about, you're getting tunnel vision with paying off your mortgage, for instance, and ignoring, the benefits of topping up your super.
Yeah.
Like it's almost like the penny just sort of dropped. I was like, saving on tax to that percentage, is far greater than what you could save on interest. And I guess, going back to this risk, that all goes and it costs you more if you get that wrong.
Yep.
So, well, you've lost the benefit and you've lost access.
Yeah.
So it's
and that's why it's a big step to decide to go down the self-managed pathway, right? It shouldn't be taken lightly because there are plenty of funds and products out there where you can manage your super without that risk generally applying, right? So why would you take that on yourself by doing self-managed unless you definitely believed you could do well with the money you're investing and you had control over it and all the rest of it? There was reasons for you to do it. Otherwise,
and if you were prepared to engage broader experts
when you need it, yeah. If you can't tick those boxes, there's quite a few flags saying, you know what, you might as well just pay the fees to be in a good fund that suits the outcomes you're trying to achieve in retirement, and have that conversation with a financial advisor and go, should I go there? Should I go in this vehicle? Right? Because you've got two options. You could go with an advisor. You could go, you've got three options: an advisor, an industry fund with an advisor, or you could go down a self-managed pathway with an advisor. But which vehicle is going to get you there is up to, what you need it to do, and should be part of a broader statement of advice you should get before you go down this pathway. And my fear is sometimes you see these things online where people can just set up a super fund straight off the bat without getting advice. And as much as you as an accountant, you want more fees, you don't want those fees because chances are those funds are closing down very quickly because people didn't need them or didn't want them. And it's a painful process at that point.
I think one thing I thought of the other day was, and it's, I guess, on the point of leaving your investment, like to sort of mature. And it's probably the best investment I've ever made was one that I forgot about.
Yeah. Yeah.
So literally just an old, I think it was like a NAB trade account, forgot that I had it. There was not much in there, but it was like a resource stock, and I found it, like 5 years later, and it, had gone up like 10 times. So
that's the old quote that is on our website. It's about that time in the market and not timing the market.
Exactly.
Right?
And I 100% would have sold it if it had gone up
5 times, 2 times.
Probably not even 1 time. So.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that'll do.
Yeah.
So it's a funny one.
Are they still trading well?
No, they're gone now.
Thank you for joining us once again. If you're interested in our waffle about self-managed super funds, feel free to join us on smsfmate.com.au or search SMSF Mate in Spotify.